the invisible conversations with your aging parents or the invisible conversations with your adult children. Either way, wherever you fit in the scheme of things,
Mhm.
the invisible conversations can go both ways. I wrote this book actually 11, 12 years ago, and I had a conversation with my older sister on the phone today where I'm like, oh, I can share that story tonight
Okay.
because they are, this was, she has a good friend who is 71 and who was scammed by, a store at the mall and has spent $80,000 and now is in the hole and has to, pull out. So it's, the financial worries of people as they age and how relatives can be part of that and friends or not in terms of helping them.
Mm.
So these are current things. I will share stories. Actually, I wrote this book after I left the church that I'm back in now. I was a senior pastor in between. I've been ordained for almost 33 years. It's hard to believe that. 4 different congregations and doing lots of different things. So these are all real stories. And the book, I was telling Liz right before you all came on, the book really wrote itself after I left the congregation before. I just went to the library every day for 4 weeks or 4 months, and it just wrote itself. So it's been out. I've done a ton of talking about it. And as I said, the stories just continue. So when I started writing this, I thought, you know what? Let me call my own mother, who at that time was 75. She had just gone through major surgery. And I know that at one point, 15 years prior to that, she had asked me to be her healthcare proxy. It could be medical power of attorney, whatever it is in your state. It was that. And she had sent me all the documents, and I knew she was getting ready to go in for surgery. And so I said, Mom, I'm just checking in with you to make sure that everything's okay. And she said, well, and I went, what? She said, well, it's changed this time. And I went, okay. And I tried to be kind of conscious about what I was feeling and thinking. And so I said, how come? She goes, I changed it. And I said, well, how come you didn't tell me? And she goes, I didn't want to hurt your feelings. So I thought, okay. So evidently I had created some kind of situation where she didn't feel like she could come to me honestly and tell me those things. And I told her as we continued to talk, and I kind of kept a gauge on what I was feeling and thinking. I said, Mom, this is not about me having hurt feelings. This is about you getting everything that you need and want in your healthcare. And so what happened as a result of that conversation and being able to talk about that a little bit, because she was afraid that I would not consult my sisters, is what she was afraid of. And I said, really, the thing is carrying out your wishes. So what happened as a result of that is that we got closer because we were able to be honest and not take things personally. She had the courage to talk to me. I had the courage to kind of stay in my feelings and not respond reactively. And we forged a deeper and more honest relationship for the remainder of her life. It was pretty extraordinary. But that was one of the things that made me think, oh my goodness, here I'm writing about this and this is happening. So research shows that nearly 1/3 of adults in the US have a major communication obstacle with parents that stems from the continuation of the child-parent or the parent-child role. And that same dynamic and others can come into play as well for older adults dealing with boomer children. So we know that we communicate through conversations. They're spoken and unspoken. They're verbal and nonverbal. And they're visible and invisible. I use the term, actually, I've trademarked it, the invisible conversations, to describe all of those conversations that stay up in your head but don't come out of your mouth, and to the intended person or people. And oftentimes they create a huge chasm in the relationship. And they can cover most topics with which we're uncomfortable. So due to their nature, they can deal with emotionally charged issues such as sex or money or intimacy or religion, values, culture, patterns of behavior, end of life decisions, just to name a few. And they can deal with the past or the present or the future. And they can last for a few minutes or they can last a lifetime. And they happen to those who are closest with us, as well as those whom we barely know. But the thing is, there's a huge cost to everyone who's involved. So some examples of when these invisible conversations may come to the surface are when, as a boomer, you begin to see your parents declining and becoming more frail. Or when you as a parent get a life-altering diagnosis. Or when there are questions about how dad's care will be handled and by whom. When questions are raised over where mom will live. When there's a struggle over caregiving responsibilities or future inheritance between siblings. When dad wants to date again after mom's death. When death is nearing and there are unresolved issues from long ago. Those are just some of the topics. So I'm interested in this particular context between adults and their aging parents, or aging parents and their adult children, not only because of my own experiences with my own parents, but also because I've seen it, and I know Liz has too, in the 33 years of ministry as a parish pastor, a hospital chaplain, a nursing home chaplain, and I've been witness to countless families living and loving life together and eventually reaching the aging and dying processes. And I've walked through this journey with extraordinary individuals with so much courage who are living fully while they age, and many who have faced end of life. Some have done it with joy and peace, and others with reluctance and struggle. And I've stood by adult spouses and adult children and caregivers as their loved ones have received diagnoses and if they have died. And throughout my ministry, I've been with families who've been able to say everything they've needed to say along the journey of life, and others who've had multiple invisible conversations, some of which have been in operation for decades. John Greenleaf Whittier once said, "For of all sad words of tongue and pen, the saddest are these, it might have been." So I have found that those who have tools to express their feelings and their needs and their desires are better able to deal with the aging and dying processes, both in the short and the long term. And this is true both for the parent and the adult child and vice versa. So let's talk about what's on the mind of some boomers. And you all can put questions in the chat as we go along, but these are some issues that have come up through research at AARP over the years. So 4 in 10 adults over 50 say healthcare issues are a top problem facing midlife and older adults in their state. 80% of adults 50 and over worry about one or more financial issues, public assistance benefits, Social Security, Medicare, and maintaining finances and lifestyle and retirement. And we know that with the economy. Over 80% of adults worry about one or more consumer protection issues. I mentioned my sister's friend just today. She's literally, they went and reported this, felt like a fraud or a scam, and the police said, no, actually you gave them your credit card. So they really didn't do anything wrong. But you know, the next thing would be for you to go and sue them. So I mean, that's, how stressful is that, right?
I have it on mute and videos off. So what?
What's going on? Am I muted?
No, I just needed to mute her.
Oh,
That's
okay.
fine. You're fine.
Okay. All right. Staying in their own homes as they age is important to adults 50 and over for many folks. And nearly all say it's important to have long-term care services that allow people to remain in their own homes. So what does that look like? And are there adjustments that need to be made to your house? Over half of us have been touched each year by the death of a close family member or friend. 90% of us will face healthcare decisions about end-of-life care. With the boomer generation now in the midst of retirement, the population of aging and critically ill is the highest in our lifetime. Studies show that most of us expect our families to carry out our wishes about end-of-life care, and yet 75% admit that we've never clearly articulated what those wishes are, and our families are afraid to ask. So that's what's so interesting. Oftentimes when I've gone around and done talks on this, I'll talk to the aging parents and they say, my children won't let me talk about this. They don't want me to, they don't want to face that I'm getting older. and it's really frustrating for folks. Many of us are in or will be in some sort of caregiving role for a parent or a spouse or even for a child. Today, an estimated 120 million adult Americans are either providing unpaid care to an adult family member or friend, or have provided care in the past. And according to estimates of the National Alliance for Caregiving, during the past year, 65.7 million Americans, or 29% of the US adult population, served as family caregivers for an ill or disabled relative. That's astounding to me. And that's up from 10 years ago when there were 20 million and 7 percentage points. The average age of the person receiving care is 65, and 63 is the average age for the caregiver. Now, thinking ahead, 66% of the population, or more than 138 million Americans, believe that they will need to provide care to someone in the future. And that has costs all the way around. That's a whole nother conversation about how do you have respite care? How do you take care of yourself? What do you do if you're working full time? How do you make adjustments there for your to earn the income that you need? Many invisible conversations take place around caregiving roles. No matter how much you love the person, the stress from invisible conversations can be costly not only for you, but for the individuals your surrounding family as well. So for instance, we've done some programming at church. I know you all have as well, but we brought in agencies to kind of talk. And, I've asked, how do you deal with racism, for instance? If there's a caregiver that's brought in and the person who's receiving care has racial bias, what do you do? How do you have those conversations? And how do you provide the right person for the person who needs the care? So why don't these conversations take place? As I said at the beginning, there's that breakdown of nearly 1/3 of adults have major communication obstacles with their parents that stems from a continuation of the parent-child role. And that same dynamic can come into play. But while the stressors of caring for parents may feel difficult to navigate, I've heard story after story of caregivers whose major stress comes from dealing with their siblings in relation to mom and dad. Issues of unequal division of care, jealousy over how much a parent has given one child's family over another. An attorney that I talked to said, you paid for Jenny's children's prep school, but you didn't pay for mine. Fear that one sibling is taking advantage of mom or dad financially or emotionally. The line of elder abuse. Fear over not having a say in what happens, and information then is not shared. So I'll share a quick story here, painful story. My mother died now just right at 2 years ago, but she had a very short illness. My older sister and brother-in-law are in a financial situation where they were able to provide for my mom in her later years the standard of living that my other two sisters and I couldn't. I have a child, my other younger siblings have children, and my older sister married a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. So they had the money to do that, and they chose to do that. However, they were angry that the others of us who lived in different parts of the country weren't giving the same amount to my mom. And so my older sister, with whom I grew up, just 3 years older, didn't talk to the rest of us for 3 years. It was excruciating. And, her spouse, who has a whole other issues and stuff, would say, tell her, your other daughters don't love you as much as we do because they're not giving you this. So it's just excruciating kinds of deep, invisible conversations. I would call my sister and I would say, look, I don't even get what's going on. I think I know why you're not talking, but I don't get this. I mean, she didn't come to my wedding 4 years ago. And then what happened when my mom suddenly got ill was everybody had to go to the hospital, and we all were in the waiting room, and we had to come together to talk about her end of life care. She was on a respirator. She had aspirated, And so we started talking, and we all went in individually and talked to her and said, Mom, we're talking again, because that was killing her that we weren't talking. At least my older sister wasn't talking to the rest of us. And miraculously, the next day she comes out of the aspiration, she's taken off of the ventilator, and she starts, she responds, and she's able to talk to each of us and give us messages of love. And we were able to assure her that we were talking again. And then 2 days later, she died. So in her last move of love and care and faith, because she was a woman of deep, deep faith, was to bring us all together again. So that invisible conversation kind of went over, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So the motivations for not having these conversations may be conscious and they may be unconscious. So for the most part, they're purposely not spoken to the intended recipient. Sometimes they're spoken indirectly to others. Invisible conversations leave you with many feelings, like the ones that we all had in our family: frustration, fear, confusion, guilt, anger, shame, sadness, complacency, desperation, anxiety, and resentment. But invisible conversations and their accompanying feelings can take a lot of space up in your brain, creating useless chatter and leave you with a lack of autonomy, both internally and externally. And families might have certain spoken or unspoken rules for how certain behaviors are to be played out in family roles. There's a man that was his mother was the matriarch of the family, and she, kept all of the finances and stuff. The father didn't know anything of what was going on. And the son, all of a sudden, the mother pulled her son to the bedside. This was an Italian family. And she said, he said, Mama, I'm going to take care of you. Don't worry. I'm going to take care of Dad. And she died, but she didn't tell anyone where anything was. So he had no idea how to pay for the funeral, number one, how to get into the accounts. And he was racked with all of this guilt because the rule was you didn't go in and talk to Mom about money. That was the family rule. So it cost him a lot, because he ended up later on, after he cleaned out the house, he found a check for $60,000 that was made to him, but he wasn't able to cash it because the account had been closed at that point. So it was really a mess. But that's how the toll of invisible conversations can be destructive. Sheila Heen of Harvard and co-author of Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most, says, families often have difficulty actually having important conversations, even though they are necessary. Here's the good news, though. But once people begin to actually have those talks, things happen and decisions can be made. So we're not stuck. All it takes is kind of plunging in at one point or another and beginning to have the conversations. So conversations around, what documents do you have and what do you need? Living wills, medical powers of attorney. Do you want a DNR, do not resuscitate, a last will and testament? I'm working in Greenwich, Connecticut, and was astounded to hear that there are families here that do not have last wills and testaments. I'm like, really? You have a huge estate and they're like, well, we just haven't gotten to that. I'm like, okay. A checklist of medications and medical lists. People have suggested posting like a little document on your refrigerator in case you're incapacitated and emergency medical services comes in. They need to know what medications you're on, what dosage you're on. They need to know what your living will is, and having that all available right there. Finances, what costs will there be now and in the future, and where's the money coming from? Do you have long-term health care insurance? Do you have retirement funds? Where to live? That's huge. Do you need an assisted living facility? Do you need a step up where there'll be memory care at some point? Or do you want to stay in your home? And do you need in-care help and who pays for that, and how is that financed? Healthcare, keeping up with the medical information, understanding your diagnoses as you continue to age and your bodies change. Do you need to have, when you go into the doctor, do you need to have someone there as an advocate or someone who can ask questions apart from you? Taking in a tape recorder. Lifestyle, as you age, particularly of interest. I'm 30 years sober, and it's interesting to me to kind of follow along. I've done some studies around alcohol use as people age. And did you know that according to the National Institutes of Health, older adults have a greater sensitivity and lower tolerance to alcohol as they age? The alcohol actually worsens conditions such as osteoporosis, diabetes, high blood pressure, and makes some medical issues harder to find and treat, such as early dementia. And it can also interact with medications. Caregiving responsibilities, what's needed right now versus down the road, who's responsible, how do you get extra help, and how do you find the right match, as we mentioned earlier. The impact of loss. As your sight goes or your hearing goes, that is a significant piece of loss that needs to be processed with someone. And for instance, I need to get hearing aids. I refuse to do so, but my hearing's not great. And so, you know, it takes this toll on people around me. When do you stop driving? That's a huge, huge thing. People generally suggest that you, rather than a family member pulling the keys, that you go together to the doctor and have a doctor say so. But AAA has a free downloadable booklet that you can go in. It talks about that whole thing about when to stop driving. Recognizing the continuing need for companionship and sexuality. So particularly after the death of a spouse, you know, I went to visit my grandfather after my grandmother had died. And he was sneaking up to the floor above him to go have companionship with a woman. And my father and my uncle were freaking out because they thought he was going to marry this woman and then the inheritance would go. So it was like, and my grandfather just needed companionship, right? And his needs for sexuality were still there and intact. Communicating life stories, remembering your stories together before it's too late. So there was a woman that was actually the editor for this book who said that she would go talk to her World War II veteran father and just say, rather than tell me this and this and this, tell me what you experienced when you went over that hill. And you found this, kind of getting in a different way to stories before they're lost from memory. Unfinished business, taking care of clearing out the pathway of the past. What do you need to say? In his book, 4 Things That I Remember Most, Dr. Ira Byock talks about families with whom he's had interactions in palliative care. And sometimes the families that he sees only have a few minutes or hours before their loved one is going to die. And so he suggests using 4 simple phrases to guide your conversations. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. They're simple and yet profound. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. I'm going to just go on a few more minutes and then we'll have a chance to kind of do some talking back and forth. But my dad's story was, he was abusive in my childhood. My parents divorced when I was 13. He was a very successful bank president across the United States. He was in the Wall Street Journal a bunch, but really, really difficult. And at 57, he had cancer. And at that point, the therapist I was working with I was still in Princeton at seminary. And she said, you need to go down and tell your father what it was like growing up in his house. And I went, because again, the unspoken rule in our house was you didn't do anything to upset Dad because you never knew what was going to happen. So I ended up going down and driving from Princeton down to Charlotte, North Carolina, where he was living. At that point, he had had a laryngectomy, he had larynx cancer. And I just literally drove in. My sisters were freaking out because they said I was being selfish and I was going to kill him with my words and all this. But the thing is I was not in an angry or blaming place. And I went in and I sat down on the couch next to him. At that point, he could not talk. And I said, Dad, I have always been afraid of you. And what's important is now that there's peace and love and forgiveness, and that what happened before has not held me back. And he just blew me a kiss and closed his eyes. And a week later, he died. But what happened for me, even because that was probably the most honest conversation we ever had, even though it wasn't two-way. But what happened for me was that I had been stuck in a 13-year-old emotional body when the last time that he physically abused me. And what happened was that on that drive back from Charlotte up to Princeton, I dry heaved the whole way. It was the most spiritual experience I've ever had in my life, where I was literally growing up from that because I was able to connect with him. I mean, you can do that after people die. People go to the graveyards all the time. But to be able to tell him that without any anger or resentment, to be able to tell him that I loved him, and that what had happened between us had not held me back. I was doing my own work and it was fine. That gave him peace at the end. So it was a gift that I could give to him. So if you are an aging parent, you can give your children a gift by, if you know, to pre-plan your funeral, for instance. You can talk to your clergy people. You can, I had a couple, the wife had already died. The husband, literally within a month or so, developed an aggressive brain tumor. He came into my office and he said, okay, so here's the thing. You're going to do the service. It's going to be joint. This is the music I want. These are the scriptures I want. I don't want my children to have to plan this when they're in the midst of grief. Because one lives in California, one lives in Florida, we want to do it after the holidays. I mean, he had it all laid out. And the thing is it was the biggest gift that he could give his children, because then they were able to come and just be able to be there and greet people without, and know that the service was something that they wanted. So when to have these conversations, caregiverstress.com, and there is such a thing, says the 40-70 rule or the 70-40 rule. So if you're 40 and your parents are 70, have the conversations, vice versa. And for some, those days of being able to have meaningful conversations are over. Parent has dementia. And so that can be frustrating. I learned so much from watching one of my parishioners who was dealing with a mother who had severe dementia. And she said, she may not remember what you said or what you did, but the memory is as much in the heart as in the mind. And she quotes Kent Nurburn, who says, your heart is revealed by the way you treat your elders. And she said, this is not about my mother. It's about doing the right thing for another human being. We're all capable of finding that place of compassion, and we have to find it. And the reality is that she's right. With whoever we are and however we are in the mix of things with people who are aging, that it's as much about your own development as it is about those for whom you love and care. And it may require within you to muster a whole new set of skills that you never thought that you could draw. It may require you to draw on a well of courage that has been untapped before now, or to develop a practice of patience such as you've never had. And you will be called upon to be the best you can be, whether you are the spouse or the adult child or the friend or companion. If you've not seen it, there is a thing going around online now, and you can go on to I have a public Facebook site, Shannon A. White. Go on, and it's an ad for Chevrolet. It goes on for 5 minutes, but it is so powerful, and it speaks right to this. It's a woman who's in a family celebration, and she's obviously not in her body. She has advanced dementia, and the granddaughter, it looks like, decides that this is going to be a different kind of day for her. And so she takes her out to the old Chevy that's in the garage and and covered, and takes her out and puts in John Denver, Sunshine on My Shoulders, and takes her back to all of the places where they used, were growing up. And this woman comes to life a little bit. She starts remembering some things. It's very, very powerful. So I would encourage you to find that. Just Google that Chevrolet ad. In closing this part, Thomas Merton, in his book Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, says this: in a time of drastic change, one can be too preoccupied with what is ending or too obsessed with what seems to be beginning. In either case, one loses touch with the present and with its obscure but dynamic possibilities. You do not need to know what is happening or exactly where it is all going. What you need is to recognize the possibilities and challenges offered by the present moment and embrace them with courage, faith, and hope. In such an event, courage is the authentic form taken by love, which I love. So I am happy to delve in. The book that I wrote, basically the format of it is presenting about 70 different topics, getting a little research in, giving a story, and then giving you a list of questions to either get into the conversation or re-enter it, because they're always dynamic, right? Conversations are always dynamic. You can say one time, and then the next week you may need to go back in at it in another way. So
Yes, thank you. I did link the book right here in the chat. It's on Amazon. Shannon White, Invisible Conversations with Your Aging Parents.
Yep.
So thank you so much. There's a lot, it's a lot to take in.
a
And
lot.
is yeah. And we did a couple of questions about how do you address overt favoritism of the male child in the family, or overt favoritism of the female, or one particular, which can cause sibling rivalry and then difficult too.
So that's a great question, and one that I've seen regularly. That's kind of the, one way to do it may be to talk with the siblings and have a sibling meeting, and just say, wow, this is really interesting what we're experiencing here. How can we all have a say, or if we want to have a say, to have input? You could say, wow, I'm really feeling that again, family rules are deep, right? You're crossing over family rules that are set out. Some of it may be just having to accept it and deal with it later on after the parent's gone. Or it may be dealing with as honestly as you can and owning your own feelings. Wow, I really feel like there's some favoritism here. How can I be of help to you in this situation when you need it? What would be most meaningful to you? So one way to get into a conversation that may kind of take it out of that sexist stuff, favoritism stuff, would be to have a conversation in families. And this is so great to be doing this, because everybody gets with their families around Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? So you're going to be, all the stuff comes up, but like, what do you want your life to look like down the road, and how can we help make that happen? And there may be different roles for different people, but to be able to give an aging parent as much power as possible. And the reality is, some of those things are not going to be, it may not in this lifetime be corrected.
Yeah. And the follow-up there question about the siblings is, what do you do if, there's a proximity issue? And you named it a little bit, like, well, these two children live so close to mom and dad, so they're just going to naturally be able to take the brunt of what is happening. Like, is there a way to allow the other adult child, because it sounds like that's a conversation that the siblings need to have.
Exactly. Right. So for instance, with my sisters, we had, and it made my mom pissed off, because the sisters were all like, okay, so I said, look, mom could come. That's when she was moving from Texas over to Florida with my older sister. I said, she could come up to Connecticut with me. And my other two sisters in Virginia said she could come and be in Virginia. So it's like, we were all trying to say, okay, this is what I can do. This is what I can't do. Ultimately, in that case, one sibling had more money and was able to do. My mother was a single mom from, a long time and did not get a lot of, she didn't have savings. So she really needed that. And we were very glad that my older sister could do that and chose to do that. But that is a very real conversation to have among siblings, I think. Just to say, hey, you know what? I know this is a lot for you. You live really nearby. What would be helpful for me to do? Can I take some of these things off of your plate? Like, are there calls that need to be made? Oh,
Okay, so you have a conversation.
there's the Chevy commercial. Is the links up there? So, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I saw that one last night. You need tissues before
Yeah.
you
Oh
watch.
my gosh.
It's a tearjerker.
It is.
Okay, so how do you best have a conversation with a parent that really wants nothing to do with this conversation?
Yeah, that's real. Right. So
what do you suggest?
well, I think you go at it in different ways, right? Just say, because there are lots of different aspects, right? Like, so for instance, one of the things that my husband and I just did, and we went out of the country, and we got a folder, a file thing to put all of our papers in, so that if anything happened to us, they would all be in one place. So you might say, I want to be as supportive as I can. So in terms of paperwork, I want to make sure that all of your wishes are carried out if something happens, so that you can get the help that you need in the way that you want it. So just kind of go at it from, again, giving as much power back, because really, if you think about it, I think about as I age, if I am not able to drive the car, I mean, if you think about it, when you get your license at 16, that's freedom. All of a sudden, if you don't have the car anymore, it's the lack of power, right? So you want to be able to give as much power as possible without infantilizing parent.
So you're just saying to kind of gently push through what's the difficult initial resistance.
Right.
Like, yeah. They're trying. Yeah. And are there counselors? This is another question, like counselors, like family counselors who will deal with counsel around the issue of unfair inheritances or sort of all that. Are you familiar with somebody who does that kind of work?
I'm sure some family therapists would do that, maybe even some attorneys, but I mean, that is so right. That thing of, you give all your stuff to one and you cut somebody else out. I mean, I've seen that I will never forget hearing a parishioner say, my children just want me to die so they can get my money. And just, even if that is perceived only and not real, the invisible conversations around that they're so damaging. So to try to have early on, as early as you can, right? To try to say, to try to get, if you're an aging parent, to try to have those conversations well before any death or illness comes along, to say, this is what you can expect after I die, that from that end, this is what is here. This is what we're expecting. We're giving away this amount of money to charity or to church or whatever, but this is what will be left for you. Or, I don't know. Those are really, really, they're so intertwined with other kind of power dynamics, right? Yeah. So again, as many times as you can enter into the conversation from different angles, the better. And sometimes doing it around, just calling a family meeting is good. Again, if you've got the parent that doesn't want to have the conversation, try to go into it with, we want to give you as much power and control as possible. So help us, or help me, to understand how you want things to look as you get older. How can we make things as smooth for you as possible? If you are when I went to Wilton, a couple of months, literally 2 months into my time there, a man who was 70, who, he was a very Ivy League trained attorney, very smart. He was a ski racer and cyclist and everything. He was on the slopes, hit his head, and never talked again. And his wife had no idea. She had never written a check. So it was like all of those things that their financial conversations, even between spouses, had not been, she didn't know where anything was. She didn't, I mean, it literally was going from one day to the next that things totally changed. And there was so much fear around that. So to approach it as, we want to be able to take care of everything. So let's make sure we're all on the same page. So like, where do you keep your passwords? Where do you keep, like, how would people know what life insurance policies are? That's again, what we started putting in this box that's fireproof. Like where would somebody go for a one-stop shop to find everything that they need?
Yeah. I'm just looking to see, I think that there's it sounds like one of the questions had to do with, are we supposed to, if we have a parent who's saying to the siblings, to the children, the adult children, oh, you're just waiting for me to die to get my money. Is that a cry for no, we love you, or is there some way to kind of address that directly? I think that's what the question.
Yeah. So that in that situation, the father went to his grave thinking that, unfortunately.
Okay.
That didn't come out till later. So
so he wasn't saying that directly to.
No, he said that to me.
Oh, okay.
And I went, oh wow, that is so hard to hear, right? So just acknowledging the pain and the fear and the feelings around that. I said, I don't even remember because I was like 10 years ago, but just to be able to say, there's so much pain around that. You must, it sounds like you don't feel really close to your son. For that to happen, and how might you be able to move a step closer so that you can have some conversations around that? Again, just not coming in presuming to know anything, but just to kind of say, wow, that's so painful to hear. Right, to acknowledge the chasm and then just kind of seeing where it kind of navigates from there.
And then you had mentioned that in your book you offer questions for, have you had experiences, I'm sure you've had stories that people come back and tell you have one or two examples of how it had helped? We use these questions in this context and this is how it helped.
I said one of the biggest compliments was somebody, I was on at the Westchester County Caregivers. I was the keynote speaker for Westchester County Caregivers thing. And the woman who was the hospice rep said, this is a great primer book. I've used this. And I'm like, what? Like, this is just me just saying what I've experienced in ministry. And same thing as you, Liz, I'm sure, as you've gone along and seen things. Where people have said, yes, I was able to get closer, or I was able to get closure around this. But, a lot of it is this is so deep for people. So it's not that they're going to become running and saying, oh, I'm so happy that, it's.
No, but I think a lot of times people don't have the language. They don't even know where to start. So,
right.
So this is helping you to get started.
Right. And there's a lot of shame involved, right? And the family systems where you feel like you should know and you don't know, and you can, but definitely therapist. My husband's a therapist. I mean, he deals with this kind of stuff too, and just cleaning out family issues. And I mean, gosh, we carry around so much stuff that keeps us bogged down, and it keeps us from connecting with aging parents or aging parents with their adult children at a time when we need connection the most, right? That's the whole idea behind this, is to kind of clear out some of it so that there can be some legitimate and authentic connection, because that's, we're in the epidemic of loneliness, according to Surgeon General, right? And connection comes from being able to be authentic with one another and kind of sharing how you feel and how sad something is. And then if it's charged with all sorts of unfinished business stuff, that makes it more difficult to kind of sort through. So
Yeah, yeah. So, I don't see any more questions here, but friends, does anybody have anything else they would like to query to maybe test the waters here? I know it's these are hard conversations, so
so difficult. And they've taken, for sometimes, for some people, this is a lifetime's worth of stuff that's coming out now. And Liz, I'm sure you know too, I experienced it, that stuff comes out at weddings and funerals. It's like we were talking before we came on, and I said, yeah, well, I'm doing a wedding on Friday or Saturday, and wanted to make sure that I'm navigating in on things. And, a funeral where someone said recently, oh, if my brother comes, I'm leaving. Those are real things that come out at very important times when you need and want to connect.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the message overall is not to wait, is to just try to broach these conversations. Yeah. And, honestly, you could even say, hey, I listened to this talk and here are some things that the person said.
You know what's so interesting? Yeah. And what's so funny is that as I've gone around and talked about this now for 10 or 11 years, it's the seniors that are buying this book and giving it to their kids and going, hint, hint, I need to talk.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So it's like, it's like they want, a lot of people are, as they age and getting closer to the next life, are really
they want to have the
clear.
conversation.
Yeah, they
okay.
want to. Yes.
That's encouraging. Okay. Okay. So friends, we have a couple more minutes if anybody has any other questions while Shannon is here, and the room is quiet.
I know.
It gives you a lot to think about.
The main thing is to do your work, do your own work. If stuff is coming up for you, I mean, that's the thing. I got into therapy and eventually into AA. And I was able to then go to my dad and be able to have that conversation because I wasn't bringing in a lifetime of resentment and anger and fear for what had happened in the past. So we could be really currently, I wasn't reactive then. And I didn't, I'd prayed a lot about that going down, and it took a lot of courage because I got a lot of flack from my stepmother and from my siblings that said, if you do anything to hurt him, you're never welcome in our house again. But I'm like, wow, you know what? I really need to stand up for myself though right now. And I need to be honest about what this was like. And, that's not going to be the path for everybody. There was so much unspoken stuff. And, quite honestly, my three sisters are still, he died 34 years ago, and they're still working out their things. So, in their own ways, whatever that looks like. So for me, it was better to do it simultaneously, and work out therapy. Different people, different strokes.
The four things that matter most. We had Dr. Byock with us a number of years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's terrific. And I think we even did a sermon series on that.
Wow.
On that book. Very, very helpful. Yes. Pastor Mark is chiming in and saying, yes, we did, because he organized that. And I do think that we continue to hear that kind of comes back as just, these are important things to say throughout our life, and to dare ourselves to be able to.
I mean, I've learned this in 12-step groups too, that, if you have a resentment at somebody else, it's really you that's poisoning. Right. You're taking the poison, expecting the other person that's to die. And it's killing you. So it's how can you be freer in your life? Right.
And I also really appreciate the fact that you're talking to seniors who are saying, we really want to have these conversations. So somebody's saying, you could say, I'm getting my will and living will updated. Have you updated yours? Using the word updated assumes that there is one. That's very good. Thank you.
Make that assumption. Make it, just give them the benefit of the doubt.
Updating. Okay, I
I
like it.
love that.
That
That's
is very helpful.
yes, indeed.
Yes, and then you're naming it, oh, this is what I'm doing, and it opens up the conversation. I wondered about you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
So that's why this community is so helpful. So,
Indeed. Sounds like you're already in on the conversations. That's wonderful.
yes. Okay. Well, friends, we are going to close out if there are no other questions. And really, Shannon, just really thank you. It's wonderful to see you, and thank you
Yes.
so much for
Ah,
just your willingness to offer us this information in this space. And as we go from this space, it's always our wish that you be well. We will be gathering in person for our Blue Christmas service of remembrance next Wednesday. Those of you who prefer to Zoom or can only Zoom because you're out of the area, you can live stream that. And of course, you know I love to send you emails, so you will see that email next week in your inbox. Friends, grace and peace. Be well.
thank you.
Thank you.
We just usually kind of hang out and let everybody,
Absolutely. A couple of